welcome, guys. Glad you could be here, fellas. I'm joined by Sleeping Warrior and Artie, Artrexis lives. And obviously, Anthony's wrote a thesis on whether political indoctrination is a factor in our education. So yeah, I'll let you two guys get into it. I'll go on mute and take it away, guys.
Well, I mean, since you are the one who offered the paper, I'll go ahead and let you begin, right?
Sure. Screen share is in order. There we go. Screen share 1. Okay, do you see my Education Act page, Spurs?
Yes, I do.
Excellent.
Yeah, I see it. Excellent.
Okay, so my assertion is that the teaching of the heliocentric model, the Copernican model, is unlawful under sections 406 and 407, specifically 406 of the Education Act 1996. And the burden for me to satisfy is not the criminal burden of proof, which I'm sure we're all aware is beyond all reasonable doubt. My burden to satisfy is on a balance of probabilities, more likely than not. That's significantly easier for me to prove because my burden is less at 51%, but it's more difficult for my friend to prove or to disprove because instead of just creating reasonable doubt, he's got to get up to 51% or more too. So it's more difficult for my friend, but it's easier for me than it is in criminal law. I've broken down Section 406 of the Education Act into what I consider to be the critical components of it, and all parts of this section of the legislation must be satisfied by me in my supposition or my presentation to persuade the courts that there is unlawful activities happening. And we know that political indoctrination, we'll read it verbatim. We wouldn't want to get the law incorrect and misread it. We'll read it as it comes off the act. And we can see that 406 reads, the local authority, governing body, and the head teacher shall forbid. And we're not interested in the first section A, we're interested in subsection B. The promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in the school. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 constituent components, all 5 must be demonstrated by myself to persuade the courts that illegality is in play. So, what I'm going to do now is bring up, where is it? There. The lead case. The lead case is, let's zoom in this a little bit. The lead case is obviously the Dimmock case. Most people will be familiar with the Dimmock case. And the most interesting part of this case is that it doesn't define one of the critical components. One of the critical components is the definition of the word political. But as I'll demonstrate to you now, we'll take these in turn. I'll deal with the first one, promotion. Deal with that first. Okay. Okay, so promotion is best dealt with at paragraph 12 of the judge's decision in the Dimmock case. For the purposes of section 406, it doesn't matter that Al Gore has presented a video. Matters is, what is the law? So at promotion is dealt with at paragraph 12. And basically, what the judge says at paragraph 12 is what is forbidden. So what is forbidden by the statute is, as the side hearing makes clear, political indoctrination. If a teacher uses the platform of a classroom to promote partisan political views in the teaching of any subject, then that would offend against the statute. If, on the other hand, a teacher in the course of a school day and as part of the syllabus presents to his pupils, no doubt with the appropriate setting and with the proper tuition and debate, that is the key word there in this instance, proper tuition and debate. A film, a document, a counter argument, an assertion, a model, which promotes in a partisan way, some political view that cannot possibly be, in my judgment, the mischief against which the statute was intended to protect pupils. That would not only lead to a bland education, but to an education which did not give the opportunity to pupils to learn about views with which they might vehemently or otherwise either agree or disagree. I conclude that the mere distribution by the defendants to the schools to facilitate their showing of the film and accompanied by guidance to which I shall refer is not per se or irremediably a promotion of these partisan political views. So he makes it clear that presenting an argument with proper tuition and debate to allow children a non-bland education so that they can formulate a vehemently opposed or agreeing view um, is the key point. Um, they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to teach something without proper tuition and debate. That's the focal point for mine to assert the first part of this legislation, because the word is promotion. So promotion means if you haven't got proper tuition and debate, you're not likely to get away with just presenting arguments because you are kind of promoting it. And my assertion is that the heliocentric model is taught without proper tuition and without any debate whatsoever. So for the purposes of my submission here today, I assert that the heliocentric model is promoted. Now, what I think we should do, because this could go on for ages, I think it's fair that we deal with these point by point as we go through them. So rather than wait till the end, we deal with them as we go through them. Would you agree with that, Artrexis?
Well, respectfully,
Or perhaps I should carry on and just go all the way through and then you can respond?
um, I mean, if you, you know what, you can go point by point. Yeah, and then I can respond at the end.
Okay, so you want me to carry on all the way through, yeah?
Yeah, you can. I just, yeah,
Okay, no
I'll
worries.
just take notes on the way.
Okay, so the word promotion, I assert, is satisfied. And my friend, most recently, a guy called Everett Anderson, he agreed with me, and he's on your side. He agreed with me that it is promoted. One of the previous conversations with Spurs, unfortunately, it was recorded over by the bullet sounds that Spurs recorded on top of it. But he did agree that it was promoted within the context of within the meaning of six, the heliocentric model that would be. Moving on to the next element of the legislation, the word partisan. We find the definition or the guidance for partisan in paragraph 11. Paragraph 11 states there was not much. Again, there was not. Again, there was not in the event much difference between the parties in this regard, although there was some earlier suggestion on behalf of the defendant that partisan might relate to party political. It soon became clear that it could not be and is not so limited. Mr. Downs pointed to a dictionary definition suggesting the relevance of commitment or adherence to a cause, in my centrism, but in the judgment of the judge, the best synonym for it might be one-sided. Hence, the case for the prosecution was that paragraph 27 of his skeleton argument, case for the defense, it was in this case, not prosecution, the defense. Skeleton argument helpfully suggested that there were factors that could be considered by a court in determining whether the expression or promotion of a particular view could be or indicate partisan promotion of these views. Even if we don't agree that the meanings of the words partisan means one-sided, all of the factors that are listed in paragraph 11 of the judge's decision in Dimmock are all satisfied by the heliocentric. There is a superficial treatment of the subject matter typified by portraying factual or philosophical premises as being self-evident or trite, with insufficient or justification, and without any indication they might be subject of legitimate controversy. In the context of gravity, for example, gravity is a big issue. There is legitimate controversy, and there is no indication whatsoever from the teachings of the heliocentric model that it is questionable. It just doesn't get taught. The misleading use of scientific data, well, I think we can all agree that there's a lot of misleading use. Science doesn't have consistent definitions for a lot of key things, like the definition of the word force, for example. They can't define what gravity is. Some people still call it a force, like people like Fight the Flat Earth. 1915, Einstein replaced force with bendy spacetime in his theory of general relativity. More recently, Dr. Verlinde from the University of Amsterdam basically admits and cites that gravity, they've known for a long time that gravity does not exist. It's time to yell it. Misrepresentations and half truths and one sidedness, clearly factors that are all influenced by or consistent with the way that the heliocentric model is taught. Second factor, the deployment of material in such a way as to prevent pupils meaningfully testing the veracity of the material and forming an independent understanding as to how reliable it is. That's the key bit, forming an independent understanding. How can you form an independent understanding when you don't realize that there are reliability issues with it because you're not taught that there are issues with it? The exaltation of protagonists and their motives, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Cox, etc., and the demonization of people like me, questioning the evidence. The derivation of a moral expedient from the assumed consequences requiring the viewer to adopt a particular view and a course of action in order to do right, as in pass an exam, as opposed to do wrong. If you don't conform to what they tell you with regards to the sun being 93 million miles away, for example, you will not pass your exams. You can't question it. So this is clearly satisfied. So if we can't agree what partisan means, in the alternative, all four of those factors in paragraph 11 of the judgment are satisfied. And by virtue of that, I'm going to move on to the word political. In fact, actually, I'll come back to the political bit because that's the contentious bit. I'll deal with views. The word views doesn't mean teaching, it means views. So that could mean teaching. It could also mean the personal opinions of the teacher, but it also could be the issues that are in the document or the policy that you are reading from, in this case the national curriculum. If there are political views, then political views in the policy that's being implemented, they don't have to be education. They can just be the political consensus, the scientific consensus, because scientific consensus by definition is a view, because they can't prove this stuff, and that's the point we're making. And then it says, in the teaching of any subject in the school. Well, obviously, science and physics is going to be covered by this. You don't have to pose an alternative argument like Al Gore did to be caught by Section 406. The teaching of physics in itself in the national curriculum satisfies the final factor on this sentence to satisfy the offence. Now we're left with the word political, which, from my own experience with people that I've been discussing this conversation, having this conversation with, is really the big word. It's very small, but everybody seems to have an opinion on it, which is entirely right that we all do. We don't know what political means in this context, but we are given some information in the judgment of the judge. And the best argument I've heard, or sorry, the most interesting argument that I've heard in this topic has come from Trish Blythe. It's a very narrow, and I'm not going to reveal the point that she made, because I don't want to fuel the argument in the favour of ballers for a point that is, in my opinion, legally flawed. But nonetheless, it was a valid argument. I disagree with the argument, but it was worthy of discussion. And it's the best argument I've heard to date. Paragraph 4 reads, Chamberlain. Martin Chamberlain does not challenge that the film promotes political views. Thus, there is no need to consider any analysis or definition of the word political, which is plainly not limited to party political, such as in the govern. That is an issue because we don't know. The judge didn't really give us any real help directly. However, what he does say in paragraph 3 is when he viewed the film, he expressed his opinions as a viewer rather than as a judge. This means his comments are obiter dictum. If you look at obiter dictum comments, is comments that are made obiter are comments that are not meant to be and cannot be used against a judge, not in support of or in defense of an argument. Does give us an opinion of what he was making the view as an opinion as a person, but when they expressly distance themselves, they're doing it for one of two reasons. Either their view is different as a judge, or they don't want to be bound by it, or both. So comments that are made obiter are comments that cannot be used in favor of or against anybody, but they just give insight to what the judge, in his opinion as a person, thought of the issue in hand. And he says, Mr. Gore has established his case that the views in the film are political by submitting that Mr. Gore promotes an apocalyptic vision which would be used to influence a vast array of political policies, which he illustrates in paragraph 30 of his skeleton argument. Then he gives 4 factors that in Mr. Gore's video would be considered political. But we could formulate these and transpose these from the political points that were made in Al Gore's video to political points in like the heliocentric model. For example, fiscal policy and the way that a whole variety of science experiments and research are paid for by the taxpayer in the conquest of science when it's actually pseudoscience, stories, made up nonsense. I mean, you can see how we could influence, how we could not influence, how we could paraphrase these into like political arguments if we were to take this to court. Investment policy in the way that governments encourage directly and indirectly various forms of activity, like paying space agencies, the European Space Agency, supporting NASA, anything to do with this nonsense that we know doesn't exist, the space that we're told doesn't exist, anything to do with that can go. Energy policy and the fuels in particular. So that one really doesn't apply, but we could substitute it with a similar one. And then we've got obviously foreign policy and the relationships held with like the USA, for example, that might consume things that we might do in relation to NASA or whatever, or even just scientific endeavors. If we're being if the heliocentric model is being argued that it's political, with some thought, we could formulate arguments that demonstrate that it is political by nature to teach children the heliocentric model, because all we've got to do is paraphrase. Now, I'm not suggesting that I've done that well. I'm not saying that I couldn't do it well. I'm just saying that if we needed to, in a matter of court, we could make this political and demonstrate that it is. And of course, it is political. And a couple of my final sentences before I hand over to my friend highlighted towards the end of the document, the guidance. And this is a really brilliant sentence to contrast the point between of heliocentrism more, against like a balanced and unbiased presentation of the opposing views, things like gas pressure without containment. Housekeeping points essentially. Does the heliocentric model influence the opinions of children, or does the teachings of the heliocentric model stimulate children into discussing heliocentricity and Copernicanism or whatever in school classes? Is there any stimulated conversation with children into discussing the nature of the world in which we live? Like whether or not moonlight's cold, or whether or not gravity exists, or any of the points that we're talking about as adults? Because my submission respectfully to the courts would be that they are absolutely influencing the opinions of children, and there is definitely no stimulation of children into discussing the points. And this applies to evolution equally as much as it applies to heliocentrism. But because it applies to both of them, you can argue both arguments like totally compatibly, because they are interchangeable. There is no discussion. You've got to know that 93 million mile away sun, and you don't question it. You've got to say that gravity is a force and F equals ma, even though gravity's not been a force since World War One, and F equals ma has been superseded by quantum mechanics. But that's what they're teaching kids. That is indoctrination. And in my submission to the courts, I assert that the heliocentric model has been promoted, partisan, is political, is views, and is in the teaching of any subject in the school. All of this is satisfied in full, and it's obvious. There is no debate. The teaching of the heliocentric model is indoctrination. It is political indoctrination. Anything applying the policy of the national curriculum is indoctrination. And my burden of proof is to get to 51%, just 51%. However, my friend here has to get his argument to 51%. It isn't to create just reasonable doubt as it is in a criminal case. He's got to get it to 51%. So with that, I shall relinquish the rest of my time to my friend.
Okay, thank you for that. As you had previously mentioned, the primary source of contention is on the issue of the element of political within Section 406, and that is the one I focused on in my discussion of it a couple of weeks ago. So therefore, your discussion on whether it promotes, whether it's partisan, expressing a particular view, I'm not really concerned about that. My issue is the problem is unless you can say that it's political, and by it I mean heliocentrism, you don't have a case. And so I'll meet that burden of 51% unless you can actually make a case that heliocentrism is political. On page 3 of the copy of the paper that I have for you, at the top you mention sections 406 or recite sections 406 and 407, and you talk about partisan politics in the next paragraph. But then 2 paragraphs down, or 3 paragraphs down, towards the bottom of page 3, you begin by talking about partisan. You kind of left out political there, even after trying to do a Control F search, I didn't see any further discussion that you made regarding political. So to me, it seems like you were trying to shoehorn partisan promotion, like within political without having to discuss it. However, in the presentation you just gave, you acknowledge that political is itself its own element that needs to be satisfied. What surprised me is that well, not surprised me. I actually kind of expected that you were going to reference dicta. However, you used it differently than what I was expecting. In going to the Dimmock case, where and part 3, where you say that the judge was espousing dicta, he illustrates what Mr. Downs had said was these 4 factors in terms of why Al Gore's film was political, and it mentions fiscal policy, investment policy, energy policy, and foreign policy. Take all that together, and that indicates that political, at least you can infer from that language from there, infers that the subject matter or what is being stated is trying to influence public policy in some shape or form. And that's what Al Gore's film did. And it was clear and obvious to both sides at the time. That's why they never got into the discussion of it being political. The problem that we have here is that in your paper, you do not go into detail in a similar detail in how heliocentrism has that same sort of public policy, has that sort of influence in public policy. I only first heard your discussion just now in the last 5 minutes of you trying to make that connection. Because I was in my head, a lot of the things that you said were things that I was thinking in my head if I was going to make the same argument that you were, that heliocentrism could very well effectuate public policy to further space exploration or more funding for space exploration and so on and so forth. That was the closest thing that I got. But again, that's not in your paper. And again, political is a key component. Notwithstanding all of that, we still have to have the discussion of what I pointed out and what others have pointed out in paragraphs 18 and 19 of the judge's decision in Dimmock, where Mr. Chamberlain, the defense counsel in the case, expressly pointed out or expressly noted that excuse me, let me script this page out. Where was it? Says a scientific hypotheses, such as the hypothesis that climate change is mainly attributable to man-made emissions of greenhouse gases, do not themselves constitute political views within the meaning of 407. And of course, in paragraph 19, the judge agrees with that assessment. I could just as easily, in my counter argument to you, say, Judge, all you have to do is replace in the parentheses where it says this hypothesis that climate change is mainly attributable to man-made emissions, replace it with the hypothesis that the Earth is round and revolves around the sun. These are the heliocentric model. Whether you believe is supported by substantial evidence or has very weak evidence, is scientific. It's not political. You haven't demonstrated otherwise in how it's not, or how it is political in any way. So the argument stands that you have to get past what the judge says here and other similar statements made in other cases. For example, before coming on here, I looked up the case. For example, in British Chiropractic Association versus Singh, it was a libel suit. It was a libel suit revolving around the efficacy of chiropractic care, and
what year was that?
This is 2010, and this would say, quote, "We would respectfully adopt what Judge Estabrook, now Chief Judge of the U.S. Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, said in a libel action over a scientific controversy under Wager versus Salter, 22 Fed 3D 730. Quote, plaintiffs cannot, by simply filing suit and crying character assassination, silence those who hold divergent views, no matter how adverse those views may be to plaintiffs' interest. Scientific controversies must be settled by the methods of science rather than by the methods of litigation. More papers, more discussion, better data, and more satisfactory models, not larger awards of damages, mark the path towards superior understanding of the world around us." That, in my limited research that has been able to, that has been a common refrain in both the US and UK, that judges are not to be the arbiters of what is or is not accepted science. And I believe that that is what you are trying to do in this case by trying to shoehorn a debate on the efficacy of the heliocentric model into a litigation and trying to get a judge to determine what is correct rather than letting the science speak for itself. And of course, in paragraphs 18 and 19, that is where that is what the judge is stating as well. So I'll go ahead and stop right here.
Okay, I'm just trying to see if I can find that chiropractic case that you're referring to.
Oh, hold on. I'll give you the full site. I've
got it. Libel and slander case, though, right?
Correct.
Article being published in commented debate section of newspaper question the legitimacy of chiropractic methods to treat illnesses other than back pain. Claimant association brings proceedings for libel, whether words expressing opinion or fact. Not sure how that really applies, but I'll deal with the point.
Well, the reason why I say it applies, it reinforces the maxim that scientific controversies or scientific disputes are not settled in a courtroom.
Right, okay, so what I'll do, all right, so looking for the Spares, am I still screen sharing?
You are.
Yes, you are.
British chiropractic.
So, I've just got that chiropractic case up. Stop it. Get on that bed now. I'll tell you what I'll do. The notes that I've made whilst you were talking, the political argument. The reason why I didn't address it in the paper was because for me it's overtly political. It goes without saying that the conversation about the implementation of the policy of the national curriculum is obviously political. Now, if I've underestimated the significance of the necessariness of demonstrating the word political, perhaps that may well come back to me and I can add it as a paragraph. I don't think I need any more. For me, it's overtly political because for me, the word political derives from policy, and the implementation of a policy of the government ipso facto is political. It's overtly obvious. For me, it goes without any explanation needed. I can't really see an argument for it not being. That would be your assertion, and then I would respond to that in kind. But nonetheless, my position is that it's obviously and overtly political if you're implementing a government policy. I know you might not agree with that, but that's the reason why I didn't put it in there, because it was overtly, for me, it's overtly political.
Well,
let me address paragraph 18. You made reference to paragraph 18.
Well, Riley, I would say from personal experience, if you if I were to just forget to talk about one of the elements of negligence in a case, I'd get my ass roasted by a judge. Just because
It's
I thought it was
overtly political.
obvious. Just because I thought
Sure.
the duty of care element was completely obvious, I'll still get in
Sure,
trouble.
and this is like this is part of the peer review process in one sense by my peers, which would be you lot. If I've underestimated the value necessary, the weight that's needed to demonstrate the requirements of political, I'll add it in as a paragraph. But for me, it's overtly political, and I don't think that any argument that I've seen so far would negate that element of it because of its obviousness.
Well,
However,
okay, go ahead. I'll go ahead with 18. I'm sorry. I'll answer later.
okay, so you brought up paragraph 18 and you said scientific hypotheses such as the hypothesis that, and then you can paraphrase this into whatever, do not themselves constitute political views within the meaning of 407. My argument's in the confines of section 406, not in the confines of 407. 406 reads the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in the school. So I could comfortably make the arguments that that paragraph doesn't relate to 406. It expressly relates to 407. Even if it does, let's just say that you were able to successfully argue that it did. Look at the next paragraph. But in any event, nothing in the 96 Act obliges teachers to adopt a position of studied neutrality. On the one hand, scientific views which reflect the great majority of world scientific opinion, heliocentrism, and on the other hand, a minority view held by a bunch of crazy bastards that think the Earth might not be a sphere. But then it says at 19, of course, that is right. And 406 and 407 are not concerned with scientific disputes or with the approach of teachers to them. However, as will be seen, some of the errors, blah, 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 it is in that context that the defendant, in actively distributing the film to all schools, in this place we could be talking about the teaching of the heliocentric model, may need to make it clear that some or all of the matters are not supported or promoted by the defendant, the Secretary of State, which is my position, like gravity. Why are they pushing that gravity is a force in schools when Einstein replaced it in 1915? That is completely preposterous.
We'll see.
Why are they pushing?
Go. I'm sorry.
Hang on. All the points that we bring up in housekeeping, gas pressure next to a vacuum and all that, even with gravity as the explanation, these matters are the things that would be required to be disclaimed in the heliocentric model, which currently is silent on. And when I read the judge's comments with regards to having a bland education, by being silent on these points that are contentious, that we take issue with, that makes them have that bland education the judge is clearly asking not to have, because it should encourage discussion, it should encourage debate, there should be proper tuition. They shouldn't be getting taught that gravity is a force if it's not actually a force anymore. So and the second part says there is a view to the contrary, at least to the mainstream view. Well, this is essential to teach kids that, hey, we think this is the best model, but there are opposing views. These are where the views come from, and these are what the views are. And there should be the balance, not biased, because obviously you guys say things like, where's the edge? And we say, yeah, that's not really our position, is it? That would be a biased misrepresentation. How's about a balanced representation where we say, well, gravity is not a force. What about gas pressure next to it? And what about how do you know the molten iron core when you've only dug 8 miles down into the core, into the crust? All those points that we bring up in housekeeping are the views to the contrary. And if really it is a sphere, what is the problem with discussing it and allowing the kids to come up to their own conclusions based on their own research, so that they can basically dismiss it if they choose to, or accept it if they think, hang on a minute, you can't have gas pressure next to a vacuum without some kind of membrane. I don't see the problem.
Yeah, but see, where I see the problem is, you went on about 5 minutes on how you would associate the issues that you have with heliocentrism with that last part of the paragraph. In paragraph 19, it says, of course it's right. 406 and 407 are not concerned with scientific disputes, something that you're doing right now. However, and I know you said that I was cherry picking because I did not include the next sentence in the remainder of the paragraph saying, however, yada, yada, yada. The problem is the judge is talking about Al Gore's film. At this point in the opinion, it has already been established that Al Gore's film is political. That has not been established by heliocentrism. So therefore, you still need to satisfy the element that heliocentrism, in and of itself, the scientific hypothesis that the Earth is round and revolves around the sun, is political. That hasn't been done. And so you need to do that before you can even approach the talk about it being partisan, it being one-sided, and that there are opposing views to it. So until you cross that hurdle, you're not getting anywhere.
Well, let's just be clear. I'm not arguing that the Earth's flat or round in this question, this paper. I'm arguing that the way that the heliocentric model is taught is lying by omission. It's not telling kids that there are issues with the current model. It's not allowing them the creative license to question, critically analyze the evidence that they're presented with. It doesn't allow them the ability to question the veracity of the evidence. All the factors that are listed at paragraph 4, the factors, I know it relates to the partisan bit, but these factors are essentially the bits that the kids do not get with the current teaching of the heliocentric model, because they're not able to. Let's go back to 4. If it was the case, where the hell is it? Bear with me while I find it. If it was genuinely the case that the kids were able to question these, where is it? There. If it was genuinely the case that the heliocentric teachings were not superficially treating things like gravity, axial rotation, I mean, all the points that we make, if they didn't gloss over these with literally a model and talk about them as though they were fact and reify a model as though it's the real world, if it didn't deploy material in such a way that stops kids from meaningfully testing the veracity of the material, and this is the key bit, forming an independent understanding as to how reliable that information is. If it didn't exalt protagonists and their motives, coupled with the demonization of people like us that were only asking for proof, and then forcing them to regurgitate 93 million miles as though it's matter of fact, if those things were not present, I would agree with you that I'm arguing the scientific method and the scientific merits of the case, but I'm not. I'm saying that there are scientific issues, and that by identifying those issues, questions how it's being taught, and it's a point of law. It's not a point of science. But
as I said, and as paragraph 18 and 19 say, you are disputing the science of the heliocentric model, which is not what 406 and 407 was intended to prevent or intended to regulate.
There has to be proper tuition, and the proper tuition doesn't involve a one-sided
indoctrination. Scientific dispute. You are disputing the science behind the heliocentric model. Until you get past that political hurdle, all of this is bunk.
It isn't, because you're missing out. It isn't. You're missing out you're missing out on this word here. That word is important. Word reads, scientific hypotheses do not themselves constitute political views.
Right. Such as the greenhouse gases. But however, Al Gore's film is based on that scientific hypothesis, which isn't political, but Al Gore's film turned it political by saying it wants to effectuate public policy within the film. You got to make that connection with heliocentrism. In and of itself is trying to effectuate public policy change before you can even talk about the disputes behind it.
Yeah,
until then, it remains a scientific thing. Sorry, go ahead.
It's not about the merits of the scientific dispute. It's about the way in which it's all being taught. So when you say it's not political, I say it absolutely is political, because the teaching of the narrative itself, by virtue of it being the policy of the government at the time, by virtue of it being the way that the ministers of the state want us to think, that is overtly political. If you disagree with that, you're entitled to disagree.
Well, yes, I do disagree with it, and then you are going to have to put that in your paper, and you're going to have to get valid legal citations that says any decision by a government policy is political by nature. And so in other words, this anything within the curriculum, anything as innocuous as basic science or a basic term of point of history of William the Conqueror's invasion in 1066 is inherently political. You are going to have to make that argument, and I'm going to say that you're going to have a very tough time making that case, because I don't think there's going to be any judge that's going to interpret political that broadly.
Well, we know that it's a broader definition than what you're applying because it says so in the Dimmick case. Let's start with the definition of political, relating to the government.
I don't.
Any policy.
All due respect, I don't really care what Google says political is. I care what the UK courts say is political.
Yeah, and this is in essence where we have the problem, because we do not have, in the Dimmick case, we do not have a definition of the word political.
Well, there is that case AJ versus McGovern that the judge referenced to. Unfortunately, I tried my best and I wasn't able to find a full excerpt of the case.
Well, let's read again carefully, because you referenced McGovern. Let's read what it says. There is thus no need to consider any analysis or definition of the word political, because it was agreed between the parties that it was political. And then it says, which is plainly not limited to party political, such as that in McGovern. And I assert that what you're trying to do is incorrectly narrow it so that it is party political, to exclude it being political in the broader sense, when it's expressly defined by the paragraph 4 by the judge, that it is plainly not limited to party political.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Al Gore's film is not party political because he's not advocating in favor of any political party in the United Kingdom. He's advocating for policy change or policy enactments, and that's political. That's what the judge is saying is political.
What do you think we're trying to do then, if we're advocating for 406 to be implemented against the national curriculum, which is a policy that would need to then change?
That's what you have to argue. But you just make it, you just claim it to be inherent without any discussion of it whatsoever.
It doesn't need any. The national curriculum is a policy of the government.
So you're admitting that you're just going to hand wave dismiss discussion of a particular element in an argument that you're making. That you don't have to discuss it at all.
Not really, unless you've got a good argument for why it's not political.
Because of paragraphs 8, because I can say paragraphs 18 and 19, Your Honor, he is trying to dispute the heliocentric model, a scientific endeavor, which is not what sections 406 and 407 are intended to regulate.
And paragraph 18 relates to 407.
19 says, of course that's right, sections 419, 406, and 407 are not concerned with scientific disputes. Your Honor, he is trying to create a scientific dispute by trying to poke holes in the heliocentric model, even though he has not shown how and in any way the heliocentric model in and of itself is political.
National curriculum is the policy of a government by
heliocentric model. I'm not talking about the national curriculum. I'm talking about the heliocentric model. Unless you're going to say the mere teaching of the Williams invasion in 1066 is a political opinion. That's something that's going to be on you to try and argue.
Your Honor, look at the definition of political, relating to the government. The policy of the government for the national curriculum is political by definition, ipso facto.
In what way is the heliocentric model in any way relevant to the government or public affairs of a country?
The implementation of the policy of the government relating to the government. That, by virtue of that definition, makes it obviously political.
The distance to the sun and everything else into it has nothing to do with the public affairs of a country.
I never said it did. I said,
but that's what you're trying to argue. That you are trying to argue that the heliocentric model is in and of itself political.
You didn't listen to what I said, or if you did, you didn't answer my point that I made. Relating to the government is the national curriculum, the teaching of the national curriculum, as it is by virtue of that fact, a policy of the government at the time, and it's the way it's being taught to children that makes it political.
You're trying to catch all.
I can also argue. I
Go
can
ahead.
also argue that it is a public affair of the country that children are not indoctrinated by bullshit models. And I could make that argument too. But I think that the obvious one is relating to the government by virtue of the fact that it's a government policy known as the national curriculum. Honestly, it doesn't need any further explanation.
So then, well, then that would, but then you would argue right there that the judge was wrong, or Mr. Chamberlain was wrong when saying that teaching a class about man-made climate change, just teaching about it, is political, even though in the case it says it's not.
No, the teaching about it, the topic itself isn't political. It's the teaching of the topic that's political. That's the bit that you're trying to
Same
get me
difference.
into a scientific dispute over. No, it's not.
Yes,
The
it
topic
is.
itself, no, literally it says scientific hypotheses such as the Earth is a ball do not themselves constitute political views.
Right.
It's
So
the
therefore,
way,
they can teach it.
no, it's the way that they're taught that makes it political. It's whether or not it's political by nature, and the implementation of a government policy being taught in schools is by ipso facto political.
Yep, except in the next paragraph in 19 again, once again, your dispute about the heliocentric model is not a concern of 406 and 407. You're trying to shoehorn that by trying to
No.
say that the heliocentric model
No.
or the heliocentrism is political by its very nature without any discussion on
You're
it.
misrepresenting my argument, sir, respectfully. Listen carefully. 406 and 407 are not concerned with scientific disputes. It's not about the dispute, it's about the way it's being taught. They've got to teach it balanced.
You
right?
are
can't have it-
sorry, but you are disputing it, and you are saying because there is a dispute on the heliocentric model, the DES is in violation of 406 and 407 because they're not offering a balanced viewpoint that includes the disputed issues with the heliocentric model.
Yeah. They've got
Which is
to show
exactly
that
what
there
is
are issues.
forbidden. Which is exactly what
No.
is not concerned. 406 and
you're-
407 is concerned. It is right there. The text is right there.
But you're trying to argue that the merits of the case make it political or not. And I'm not. I'm saying it's the way it's taught that makes it political, not the merits of the case. So let's be really clear. It's not the fact that there is or isn't gravity. That is a factor that is to do with the promotion of. What is the issue is, are they being taught the opposing views so that they can come to their own conclusions? It goes back to this.
According to that case in Dimmock, unless you can show that heliocentrism is political, they don't have to go into a partisan discussion about it, or they don't have to make it bipartisan or more than just one side.
Yeah, and like I've said, by virtue of the fact that it is the government policy of the time known as the national curriculum, the implementation of that policy by its very nature is political.
And that is
When you
something that
teach-
you need to talk in your paper in order to get it through. That's the argument
Sure.
that you got to make, which again I would argue is going against what is being said in Dimmock, but you're gonna have to distinguish it.
But then I would just refer back to the definition of political.
And I would imagine the opposing counsel is going to be able to get access to that AJ versus McGovern case and actually say what the UK legislation was intending what political to mean in the context of.
We know what the AJ against McGovern case did because it was quantified in paragraph 4. The AJ against McGovern case said, where is it? Here we go. Which is plainly not limited to party political. Such as that in McGovern. In the McGovern case, it was party political.
Not
That's
being
why
limited to party political does not mean political can mean anything to do with the government.
But would you agree that that's the... Well, no, by definition, it does. Look.
How?
Relating to... by definition. By definition, literally on screen. You see my screen, right?
Yes, but that's not what your McGovern is saying. You haven't established that in your paper.
No, you're conflating terms. The McGovern case is party political. In contrast, the judge is saying it is not limited to party political, such as the McGovern case. And when we look at the definition of political, it says relating to the government, not party political. So
yes, but
I think the only point.
No, but you keep on. You are saying that because it's not limited. You say it's not limited in according to party political, as in McGovern. Therefore, anything is fucking political. I'm saying you are making an invalid leap right there.
No, I'm saying that you are literally trying to discount the fact that political is broad by applying a narrow definition. And the only position that
I
really either of us, hang on, the only position really that either of us can take is that we don't know what a judge is likely to define it as because it isn't defined in the case. And we can speculate as much as we want. Ultimately, a judge at one period of time in history will make a decision, and it's probably going to be how he fell out of bed that day that governs it. He might agree with you. He might not agree with you. He might agree with me. He might not agree with either of us and come up with his own definition for what political is. But I think that the only honest position that both of us can take at this point is that we just do not know unless it ever did get to court.
Well, I would agree with you that we do not have a hardline definition of what political means in this context, in the context of political indoctrination, or in terms of AJ versus McGovern charitable organizations. But while I would say we don't know what it is, I would refer back to 18 and 19 and say what it's not, and it's not concerned with and political and the hypothesis that the Earth is round and revolves around the sun is not political.
And I would refer back to paragraph 4, where he said it is not limited to party political, but ultimately we haven't got a definition.
And therefore the onus is on you to make that claim and make that supporting claim that political includes any discussion or any subject contained within the national curriculum.
Yeah, relating to the government national curriculum policy.
Okay, you can do that, and I will say that you're asking the judge to make a very, very broad term, implement a very broad term of political.
Well, not very broad term. It's just within the definition of political. By definition, it's within that.
Again, and I again point to the analogy that by your asserted definition of political, the invasion of William the Conqueror in 1066 is subject to 406 and 407.
Well, it probably is if there's opposing views to the contrary that are contentious and should be brought to the attention of children with proper tuition and debate, and allowing them to test the veracity of the evidence and the reliability of all the points that we've just talked about. If that issue was contentious, then yeah, it would absolutely be covered by 406.
Well, then you get into the whether or not the contention is backed by anything, but that's an entirely separate issue.
Well, it is the issue, though, isn't it? And that is the issue that the judge would have to make a decision on. And he could go with you, he could go with me, or he could make up his own shit. And we don't know.
But the thing is, what I would say what I just said is exactly what the judge said in paragraph 18 and 19. Said he doesn't, the courts don't want to do, is to try and make judgments on what is or isn't good science, or what is or isn't good history.
No, stop trying to make it a scientific dispute. It's not.
But you are. I'm saying straight up that's exactly what you're trying to do.
No, it's not. I mentioned that. No, it's not at all. It's all about whether or not they're being taught a balanced presentation of opposing views, and they're not. They're being lied to by omission, and it's clearly obvious.
Whether or not it's balanced is irrelevant until you get past that political hurdle.
And I can get past it with just the definition of political.
And I will say good luck with that. And that's my response to you.
But don't forget, if you can honestly agree that because there is the issue over political and what it means, would you honestly agree that neither of us can tell what political means because it's not defined?
Because I don't have a full access, and God willing, I wish I could have. Wish my Lexus access could go to the UK. I can't say what they would, what the UK courts would say it is, but I am confident in saying what it's not.
So, are you saying that you want the McGovern case? I can give you a copy of it if you wish.
Oh, sure. If you can get it, I would love to have it.
Sure, it's party political. It says it in the paragraph, paragraph 4. Right, let's get McGovern up. How do you spell McGovern? Hang on. I think if we just do 1981. govern, or maybe not. Thankfully, it's the only one that's there. Let's zoom out on this. Law reports. Oh, that'll do. So let's see. Held, refusing a declaration that although a trust set up for the relief of human suffering and distress will be capable of being charitable in nature, it would not be charitable if any of its main objects were of a political nature. Trusts for the purpose of seeking to alter the law. There you go. Trusts for the purpose of seeking to alter the laws of the UK or a foreign country or persuading a country's government to alter its policies. National curriculum would be a policy or administrative decisions.
Wait, the
like
national the policy of the national curriculum is trying to effectuate policy.
Say that again.
The national curriculum policy. You're trying to say it's trying to alter policy.
Yeah, the national curriculum is a policy of the UK. It's an education
but it's trying
policy.
to. But you're saying that the mere implementation of the policy is trying to effectuate policy, like in other areas.
No, I'm saying that by teaching the national curriculum, it is a policy of the government called the national curriculum. And we're saying it's being taught one-sided, dishonestly, it's lying by omission, by the contentious issues that are missing out of it, that do encourage children to think critically and have debate and discussion. And I either vehemently agree or vehemently disagree with the points that are being brought up in opposition. By virtue of the fact that we're challenging it, we are trying to persuade a country's government to alter the policy known as the national curriculum with the way it's taught to children. It's clearly political.
But the challenge in McGovern is that the trust is for a organization that is engaging in political activities, and in the Dimmick case, it's the government is presenting a specific film that itself is trying to effectuate policy change and influence policy. You're not happy. We don't have that here. We don't have that here with heliocentrism. But you haven't established that with heliocentrism.
It's overtly obvious.
You need to make the connection that heliocentrism is as political as Al Gore's film. Heliocentrism is trying to effectuate policy change, just as Al Gore's film was trying to effectuate policy change. You didn't do that in your paper.
It's like I've said, it's overtly obvious. If you disagree, then fine, I'll stick a paragraph in because I'm going to be getting it back anyway. Because they haven't, because the university don't support or didn't support this. They've not given me the format for which I'm supposed to. They didn't tell me if I needed a contents table or not. They didn't tell me which form of referencing I needed at the end or not. Should it be Harvard, Oxford, or whatever? So they've not told me what I need to do. I will be getting it back by virtue of that anyway. But if you're saying that I need a paragraph to emphasize the obviousness of it being political, then fine.
I don't think it. Well, I disagree with you in the sense of its obviousness. But regardless, yes, if you are going to establish that heliocentrism is subject, or the teaching of heliocentrism is subject to 406 and 407, you're going to have to talk about how it's political. And not to simply assume it is, and try to distinguish what you're trying to do from what 18 and 19 are saying.
So why do you not think that the teaching of the national curriculum reflects an alteration of the policy if we question it and it was found in our favor? Why do you not think that altering the national curriculum by definition is altering a policy of the government?
I'm not talking about the national policy. I'm talking about heliocentrism.
Yeah, I am talking about the national curriculum as a policy.
Okay, just because you don't like what's in the national curriculum doesn't make it political.
It does if we're asking it for it to be altered.
Nah, that's not how it works.
Literally on screen, alter its policies.
Right.
So my question
is,
the
freaking charitable organization was trying to alter policies.
Yeah. So
that
we're
was a
trying
challenge
to alter
against it.
too. Yeah, and look what it says. Refusing the declaration that although a trust set up for the human relief, suffering, and distress would be capable of being charitable in nature, it would not be charitable if any of its main objects were of a political nature. And in this case, it's referring to altering the government's policies, which is what we're asking the government to do, because they should be encompassing more of the arguments against the heliocentric model to give a more fair, unbiased, balanced presentation.
No, it's not. It's not you. Yeah, but it's not you who's trying to change the policies that's being challenged here. It's heliocentrism that's trying to change policies that you wanting to challenge.
No, it's not.
Yes,
you got it wrong.
You're mixing up the parties here.
No, I'm not. What I'm doing is contrasting the need for it to be scientific hypothesis that you're arguing with the actual fact that we're arguing, which is alter the policy, teach children the truth, or at least give them the inkling that this stuff's contentious and allow them to formulate their own opinions with some extracurricular research if necessary or whatever. But they can't just tell them that we live in a model and that's it, and then stay silent for all of the contentious issues that we bring up.
Which again, I go back to paragraph 18 and 19. You're just trying to challenge the heliocentric. You're trying to challenge heliocentrism scientifically.
We're trying to get the policy changed.
You're trying to challenge heliocentrism scientifically in order to implement altering views into the curriculum.
Oh, we're not trying to challenge heliocentricity. We're trying to challenge the policy known as the national curriculum for not telling the truth. It's overtly political. It doesn't even need. I don't even know why this discussion's taking place.
I don't know how else I can explain this to you, because you again are trying to
answer me this then. Answer me this. Why is the teaching not the merits of? Why is the teaching of the national curriculum not political when we're asking them to change that policy?
Just because you want to change the policy doesn't make the subject matter political. That's what I'm trying to get through to you. Now, I'm not talking about the national curriculum. I'm talking about heliocentrism, what you are specifically challenging within the national curriculum. You are trying to change it.
So then we have to go back to the meaning of the word views in the legislation, because just because the tuition itself may or may not be political, the views that the teaching is presenting is, and the views are of the policy.
Which again, you are saying is heliocentrism is the view that you want to challenge. You haven't established heliocentrism into being political.
No. It's the teaching of the heliocentric model that we want to challenging.
Same difference. What are you saying? That the national curriculum is just a matter of stating matter of factly of the validity of heliocentrism? That's not what it does.
Yeah, that's exactly what it does. 93 million mile away sun, no conversation.
Okay, but again, you haven't established that it's political. And the fact that you're challenging it doesn't make it political.
I don't know how you can argue that I've not demonstrated, not just in this, but in the paper itself. It goes without saying that challenging a government policy is political.
No. Challenging a government policy doesn't make the challenge political.
Yeah, it does. It was in literally. You read it there in the case of McGovern.
No, you're reading McGovern wrong. Yes, we're talking about the charitable trust. The charitable trust was trying to change policy.
Yeah,
and the charitable trust is being challenged.
Yeah, we're trying to change policy too.
And again, the charitable trust is being challenged because it's trying to alter policy. That's why it's got in trouble. That's why it got challenged, is because it's playing itself off as a charitable organization, but at the same time, it's trying to effect policy change in the UK. That's why it got the issue. Whereas you are trying to challenge, by virtue of trying to challenge something, doesn't make the subject that you're challenging political.
Yeah, it does.
It doesn't.
It's right underneath your nose now. Let me read it to you again.
You are completely getting the case wrong.
No, let me read it to you again for the benefit. Let me read it again for the benefit of Spurs audience, right? Held. Refusing the declaration that although a trust set up for the relief of human suffering and distress would be capable of being charitable in nature, it would not be charitable if any of its main objects were of a political nature. That trusts for the purpose of seeking to alter the laws of the UK or a foreign country or persuading a country's government to alter its policies.
Oh my God. I'm not disputing that. We're
asking.
The charitable trust is the heliocentric model. That's the connection between the two.
We're saying we want that national curriculum policy changing because it isn't accommodating the opposing views.
But the heliocentric model isn't trying to alter policies in and of itself.
Yeah, we are.
I don't care what you want to do. I care about whether or not heliocentrism is trying to effectuate policy. Until you can demonstrate that, it doesn't matter whether you challenge it or not.
No, we're challenging the we're challenging the policy because we think it's being taught unfairly, incorrectly, unlawfully. So by virtue of our target being to change the teaching of the heliocentric model in the national curriculum, that makes it political.
No, it does not. It does not. It does not. You keep saying you're challenging heliocentrism without establishing that heliocentrism is trying to effectuate policy, and you're challenging that under 406 and 407.
I don't think you're listening. You're not. No,
I honestly don't think you understand what you're reading.
No, I do. The fact that we're trying to alter the policies of the national curriculum makes it political.
Again, I don't care. I don't care what you're challenging. I can file suit right now.
That makes it political.
I can file suit right now and say, you know what? The invasion of 1066, it actually happened in 1100 AD. Does that make the actual event political? Is that what you're trying to say?
Look at this. The object of
please
the
answer.
trust...
Please answer that question for me. If I were to dispute, to say, Your Honor, the Williams invasion actually happened in 1100 AD. They're fucking it up in the curriculum by saying that it happened in 1066. Please change it. Does that my challenge invariably make the event of William the Conqueror's event in 1066 or whatever political?
I'm not arguing that the event is political or not. It's expressly stated.
And that's the problem that you have. Until you can do that, you're not going to win.
Let me answer the question. By virtue of the paragraph that you keep relying on, the nature of the argument is the merits of the case being political or not is not about whether or not we live on a flat plane or not, or whether the date was right or wrong. That is irrelevant. The point that I'm making is that it's of a political nature, and by virtue of it being the implementation and the request that it be changed makes it's obvious. Now, if you don't agree with that, that's your position. But let me read this final paragraph here. This is glorious. The object of the trust is to secure the release of prisoners, right? So the object of what we're questioning is to change the policy known as the national.
You are not a trust. You're not a charitable trust, though.
It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. We're trying to change the policy known as the national curriculum.
But you are not a government agency trying to government agency that's being challenged. I don't know why you keep trying to play yourself into these different roles when they're not. You're not linking it up right. I don't understand.
By virtue of the fact that we're asking for the national curriculum to be changed, that by definition is political. It's overtly obvious. I actually think at this point that you're being disingenuous because I believe.
I honestly think you don't understand what you're actually arguing, and that you are trying and you are implementing. You're putting yourself in roles that are not conducive to the cases that you're citing.
Well, let me just finalize this conversation. I'll make two more points, and then, as far as I'm concerned, we're done. Let me screen share one more time, Spurs. Screen share, is it that one? Share. Okay, so what I've done, by virtue of the fact that I find it like crazy that anybody's challenging the political nature of this. For me, it's overtly political. I've written to a barrister, and this barrister is somebody that I've spoke to before. I'll read to you my email to him and his email back, and then you can tell me whether or not you think that I understand the point or not. We spoke some time ago, and I would like to employ your services, please. I wrote to you in my capacity as blah. I am not officially with blah at this time due to some political, ironically, reasoning, so I am writing to you privately. I want you to advise me in writing on the position in law of the Secretary of State for Education in relation to the teaching of two issues, evolution in isolation and heliocentrism in isolation. Interchangeable in this context. I believe the teaching of evolution and heliocentrism is unlawful under 406 of the above act because I believe the elements of the offence are committed. I believe the teaching of both heliocentrism and evolution found the law following the Dimmitt case of 07. I believe that both topics are promoted, partisan, political, and a view of the national in the teaching of any subject in the school. My view is that the national curriculum is not ring-fenced as a safe house, but is actually subject to the law, and the above two topics cannot be taught lawfully in isolation. There are legitimate opposing views to both evolution and heliocentrism, and by failing to inform children of these opposing views, Secretary of State is fouling this legislation, and at this point, I just want the law clarifying. The main sticking point seems to be how the word political should be interpreted. The judge in Dimmock did not define what was intended by the legislature when it used the word political. The judge widened the meaning of the word political to be, quote, not being limited to party political. But without a definition, we just do not know what this would mean in court. My preferred interpretation is that political derives from the word policy, and because the national curriculum does derive from government policy, the implementation of that policy is ipso facto political. How much would you want on account of costs? To answer the following question, is the teaching of evolution and heliocentrism unlawful under 406, applying the decision of Dimmock and the legislation itself? My intention is to challenge both teachings in the court in future, and I want to know if it's likely to win or not. What would you want on account? This is what he gave me in response. Thank you for getting back to me. I had wondered what had happened to this most fascinating matter. I am indeed most interested in undertaking this advice for you, and I commend the succinctness of the question that you pose. It's always difficult to estimate costs. My instinct would be that it would want nearly £3,000. Please let me know if I can assist further. If you'd like me to proceed, I can forward the client care letter. I've copied my clerks in, and it's written from a barrister that was in the top legal 500. He thinks that my question is succinct. I agree. But you think that I'm incompetent, don't understand what's going on, and think that I'm flogging a dead horse.
Well,
I'm happy that I understand what political means in this context, and I'm pretty sure anybody else does.
well,
I think that
I would argue that
continuous.
many barristers want to be courteous to their clients at the very least.
Oh, what, you mean like George Musa was to Craig when he said that? Yes, that's a really nice word. I like that.
I
word.
don't. I honestly have know nothing about that, and I really don't care. My issue here is about the law.
My issue is about the law too. So I guess that we're sorted. We've come to a point where we can't disagree, we can't agree, and we actually need barrister's opinion, counsel's opinion on the meaning of the word political, even though in my submission, Your Honour, it is blatantly, obviously political.
That's fine, and I think the judge in Dimmock made it very clear, while he did not say what political explicitly was, I think he made it very clear on determining what it's not.
I can agree what it's not. It's not party political.
I agree. I agree. It has that it has nothing to do with scientific disputes, and I maintain that is what you're doing, even though you disagree.
Not at all. I'm not arguing that it's a scientific dispute. I'm arguing that it's being taught wrong in the national curriculum. It was in the opening paragraph of my paper.
I know, but the last 35 pages is disputing the heliocentric model.
No, it's disputing the application of the national curriculum in teaching the heliocentric model.
All due respect, the last I said 35 pages. The last 15 pages was about flat Earth stuff, like cold moon light. Disputing the distance to the sun, disputing gravity, disputing the underlying.
But do you understand the reason for why, though?
Right, you were trying to satisfy the elements under partisan, but like I said early in the beginning part of this discussion, you got to get past that political hurdle before you can go anywhere with that. And I know you keep saying that it's obvious to anybody, but I would say it's not obvious, especially when we both agree that the judge doesn't say what political is in the first place. So if the judge doesn't offer that, you got to say it as much. You got to say, this is what political means. You didn't put that in there. You just say it's so obvious to anybody, I don't have to put it in there. You're going to have to satisfy that element before you can go anywhere.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think when it's written in a legal paper, I don't think that the teacher or the lecturer is going to question the word political. She might do, and if she does, I'll just put it in a paragraph. But I don't think she actually will. But what I will say is that it was the opening paragraph in the paper said, this critical analysis of the education system attempts to point out how pseudoscience is being pushed as science and passively indoctrinating the adults of tomorrow unlawfully. The opening sentence of the first paragraph.
Yes, but
and by the way, let me just address for the reasons why the final 10 or 15 pages were the way they were. The Dimmock case was lost by virtue of the fact that the judge said it is clear that with proper tuition and debate, they were not, the views that were being presented by Al Gore's video were not being promoted. They were being presented, but they were not being promoted. And for that reason, he lost. Now, I'm saying that there isn't proper tuition and there's definitely no debate. So I'm dwelling on the failing point for Dimmock as the winning point for us. Hence the reason why I argued that there was no proper tuition. And obviously the debate point was like a 3-sentence paragraph.
Right, but I would also go back to page 3 of your paper, where it says Section 406 expressly states that the promotion of partisan politics must be forbidden by the local authority, governing body, and head teachers personally. This is the focus in the context of the current teachings of the Copernican model, commonly described as heliocentricity. What is that saying other than you are expecting to challenge heliocentricity as part of your argument?
No, it's not challenging heliocentrism. It's challenge whether or not there's proper tuition and debate as per the definition that was given for the reason why Dimmock failed.
Yeah, but you don't even talk about proper tuition debate until page 9, or excuse me, or well into the later on in the paper. I would argue for the first 3 pages or 4 pages, you're telling the reader that you intend to state that because there are problems with heliocentrism, the teaching of that model alone is a problem under 406.
So if I screen share again.
Your face is frozen on my end. I don't know if you noticed that.
Doesn't matter, I've got my thingy on screen now. Page 14. Proper tuition and debate. Emphasis added in yellow. The Dimmock case failed because of this point. The judge said merely presenting a view was not going far enough to foul the law. There must be an active promotion. Judge Burton contrasts merely presenting the Al Gore documentary with presenting to the pupils, no doubt with the appropriate setting and proper tuition and debate. Because there was proper tuition, you can't have global warming videos without kids asking questions. It's blatantly obvious that they're going to ask things like, are the ice caps really melting, sir? Are we really going to get flooded out by 2012 or whatever it was that he predicted that would happen by the end of whatever? And obviously that then forms the debate.
Right, and that pointed out that was in the context of Al Gore's film. It wasn't in the context of global warming in and of itself. The scientific understanding of global warming in and of itself.
But in the context of teaching the heliocentric model, where is the proper tuition if they're teaching that gravity is a force?
Well, I would say that heliocentrism is on the same level as global warming. Therefore, there's no need to have any further discussion on it.
So you think that it's okay to teach them a one-sided education, regardless of how it doesn't tell them about the opposing views or issues with the current model? You think that's acceptable?
Not when it comes to science, because that's not what 406 because that's not what 406 and 407, as stated in paragraph 18, are stated that's not what it's intended to do.
Right, paragraph 18 is about the issue being scientific hypotheses or not. My issue is not about whether or not it's a scientific hypothesis. My issue is whether they're having proper tuition and debate or not.
Right, but the judge went on to say that they don't. When it comes to scientific hypotheses or scientific and scientific, theories or whatever you want to call it, such as heliocentrism or global warming, they are not under any obligation to present all sides.
I guess it's down to the observer now, Spurs' audience, to decide which one do they agree with. Is
Fair
the
enough.
Promotion of partisan politics fouled with by the promotion or the teaching of the heliocentric model within the national curriculum, or is it not? So I guess
Fair enough.
Throw mind up.
Okay. Well, it was a good talk.
Yeah, guys, that was a great talk. It seems that it does need to be taken outside of obviously the internet. We're not going to resolve or find a solution on the internet. So I think this was just back and forth all day long, or for many.
Ultimately, that's the point for me. I mean, I know we're still recording. At some point, you're gonna have to knock it off, Spurs. But for me, that's the point. There is a debate point there that. To be honest, I didn't think the debate point would come with the meaning of the word political. I thought the debate point would come elsewhere. But the point is that there is debate there. And that is the reason why I wanted to do that topic, because there is a legitimate debate there that could end up in a courtroom. And I hope it does end up in a courtroom. But for the purposes of the academic paper that's being written, all I've got to find is a contentious topic that I can argue both sides to, or argue one side, take a stance on it, and argue basically the supporting views for it. But to be honest, I mean, like I said, I didn't think that the word political needed any definition whatsoever. It's blatantly obvious, but maybe it's not.
Well,
Because
I
I'm
guess
just trying to.
the way I oh, sorry, Spurs. I guess for
No, no,
me,
go ahead.
the way I see it is that the fact the mere and I think that's what I tried to emphasize and we tried to bring up in discussing the papers, that the mere fact that there's a debate does not in and of itself mean that all sides have to be presented, and I think that's what part of the argument was.
So I
Okay,
guess
so
wrap it up,
I just
wrap it
wanted
up,
to
and then turn off the recording.
I just wanted to quickly ask. So I'm trying to like find out what the issue was with the paper, Artrexis. So, I mean, it's like I don't know if you were advising him or saying it's completely wrong. Are you saying that if there was particular things added in there, then you'd be satisfied,
Well,
then you'd have a case?
well,
Like what? Yeah.
Well, I personally, because of where I stand on the whole idea of, the shape of the earth and everything, I'm probably going to disagree with him wholeheartedly on, regardless of what he puts on there. How, with that being said, that's what my focus on here was, on the legal aspect and satisfying the legal elements, not whether or not there is in fact a dispute on heliocentrism. And so my issue was stemmed from the idea as whether or not he is satisfying all the elements required for this challenge to be what's the way of saying it, whether or not this challenge is applicable to sections 406 and 407. That's where I was coming from.
Do you think, like, because is he not putting his arguments that he's saying to you and the public in his paper? Because I hear that's what you're saying,
Well,
that that's not in the paper. That's not in the paper. Is that a problem? So he's arguing for things that are not in the paper
well,
itself.
there were a couple of things in his early presentation that he put in that I would have said that if I was going to be in his shoes and make a challenge, I would have to talk about that. I'd have to express that on paper, which it wasn't. So
But the counter argument to that is that you're applying hindsight now to. I mean, I don't. There's always going to be an opposing argument, and the opposing argument will always argue you didn't make that clear, or you should have elaborated, or you should have cited this case, or whatever. But in hindsight, yeah, you could argue that, but it requires the defense position to be proposed to know that you should have done something. And at this point, I'm putting it in for the university lecturer simply to look at the merits of the claim that I'm making. And if she comes back with something that she says that she's not happy with, or he comes back with something that he says he's not happy with, then maybe it'll be added. But overall, is there a prima facie case there or not? And for me, it's
and see, that's where I would disagree. So.
and that's fine.
I don't know. It's fine. I mean, it's fine. We disagree, but I mean that's where my stand was. Again, my looking at the paper was not about the disputes that you have with heliocentrism regards to gravity, the distances, and whatever. My focus was: are you applying 406 and 407 correctly, at least in the context of the Dimmick case?
And that was your argument, and obviously we disagreed on what is the meaning of the word political in this case, and we obviously can't come to any kind of agreement. And to be honest with you, I'm really reluctant to pay $3,000 for counsel's opinion on something that I see obvious. But it looks like, I mean, to be honest with you, at some point I want this to end up in a court because I think it's fucking wrong that what they're doing. They can't teach kids this bullshit the way they're doing it. They've got to be far more transparent and say, look, these are the issues with the current model, because it's all right teaching them what the model is, but you've got to say to them as well, like, there are issues with it. People think that you can't have gas pressure next to it, and give some of the points that are problems with it, and then allow the kids to formulate their own opinions, because otherwise, A, it is bland, the way the judge said, but B, surely it's got to be better than just teaching them that we live in this model and there's no element of critical thought or analysis to it, because through gravity, they can't even define gravity. Why is it being taught?
Again, I would go again right where you're trying to say, there's, why is it X, Y, and Z? I have so many problems with a scientific dispute, and my argument is that's not something that you let a judge decide.
Oh, it's not the dispute itself. It's the fact that they're not saying the other side of the topic that they're teaching. There are two sides to it.
But the
and
problem,
they're not saying the other side.
but the problem is that in the Singh case and in other similar cases where judges have this maxim, it's not the issue isn't whether or not that particular science is valid or not. It's always, are we going to say that this science is valid, therefore the defense wins in this case, or this science is invalid, and this and the defendant wins in that case. It comes down to a credibility. It comes down, and then ultimately comes down to a credibility argument.
Oh, it's not about the science. It's about, are they being taught it fairly? And I would be able to persuade a judge. I think a barrister would be able to use his tongue, the barrister's tongue, and persuade a judge that it's only fair that kids get both sides, not one side. And ultimately, that is the point.
Okay. There was another question. Who defines political, Artrexis?
Judge.
Well, the first person I would say would be the legislature, assuming they have a table of definitions for the corresponding act. From there, if that's not sufficient, judges will, at least in the United States, will look to the ordinary meaning, and therefore they may go to Google, or they may go to Webster's, or they may go to another dictionary definition. I mean, I've seen that happen all the time, but usually the first source they go to is the respective legislatures.
Well, I don't think the word political is defined in the legislation. It normally would be in the preamble part or in the interpretations part at the beginning, and there isn't actually a section for. Hang on.
Well, I think when I looked at the act, it didn't have a table of definitions.
No, there's no. So the legislature might be, the legislation might be, but usually all the judges give definitions all the time. The judge will be the one to define what is. Now, ultimately, that's where the argument is, because you would make your assertions for what is political. I would make my assertions for what is political. He might agree with you. He might agree with me. He might agree with neither of us, and he might make his own one up. And that's why there is something called litigation risk, and it's quantified to be about 30% in the UK. Because you just don't know what a judge is going to do.
Right, I agree with you, but because I know you keep saying that it's obvious, but because I think we're kind of, how are we not agreeing that there is at least some level of ambiguity, because we don't have a solid definition in front of us? It would be up to you to spend a few paragraphs to say this heliocentrism is political because X. Because it's a matter of it's established as a matter of public policy, therefore it's political inherently.
I would say not really ambiguous at all, unless you were trying to distort the meanings of words. Political doesn't mean party political. It means political basically means policy.
Where I go, like I said, where I go is where paragraph 18, where they agree that man-made the fact the consensus or the agreement that man is causing global warming is just a scientific endeavor, and I would argue that heliocentrism is an equivalent scientific hypothesis or theory or whatever, and therefore it's not inherently political, and the teaching of it isn't political.
But then when you say that, if you read what it actually further says down in paragraph 19, let me just pull it back up quickly. There. Let's go back down to 19. What it says is that by virtue of the facts in that particular case, it was necessary that there.
Right. Well, I agree.
In this context, that the film had to do two things. It had to make it clear that the Secretary of State had to make it clear that some or all of these matters are not supported or promoted by the defendant. We could paraphrase that and say some or all of these views are not supported by legitimate legitimate controversy or legitimate opposing opinion. And secondly, that there are views to the contrary. I mean, we could literally say virtually the same words for that one.
Here's what I'm going to say, and I think I'll finish up because I got to eat something. I'm hungry. Is that when it came to global warming, the Dimmock case had Al Gore's film. For you're going to have to find Al Gore's film for heliocentrism. And I'll end it right there. So
I'm all right with that. I can end it right there too.
All right.
Dude, it was a
Superb,
pleasure
guys.
meeting
Thank
you.
you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you, fellas.
Appreciate it.
So knock
Zoom
it-
is broken. I'm gonna have to force
Knock
close.
it off recording, Spurs.
Yeah, it's off. It's off.
Right now.